Hello and welcome to Podcrash. This week's guest is Ash Dykes. We're doing something a little bit different this week. So Ash is a adventurer slash extreme athlete. He most notably was the first guy ever to walk the length of the River Yangtze in China. So that's 4,000 miles, and it took just under a year, which he got a world record for, which is very impressive. I don't think we've ever had a Guinness World Record holder before, Phil.
No, I don't think so. No, not
You've
that I know of.
No,
you've not got any secret hula hoop kind of ones or something like that.
No.
Also done other bits like kind of trekking across Mongolia, Madagascar, and has got a lot of stories along the way. So obviously on this podcast we usually do kind of organised formal sport. So it's going to be great to speak to Ash and find out what it's like to kind of go solo in many senses of the word. So welcome, Ash.
excellent. Good to be here. Thanks for calling through.
No, it's no worries. So I think, like, given that we're more like a kind of organized sport kind of podcast, I think a really good place to start would be like, where do you kind of define yourself within the sport, and what's would you call it a sport, I guess, to start with, and what's the kind of fundamentals of being like a good adventurer? It seems like you have to deal with a lot of stuff from like danger, excellent planning, physical endurance, all that kind of stuff. So where does that kind of sit from a sporting context?
Yeah, it's a weird one as well, isn't it? Because the titles that I have, I don't even know which one is the factual one. Is it adventurer? Is it extreme athlete? Is it explorer? And it's kind of one of those, like explorer, really, that's sort of ancient, that's old school. Extreme athlete, I say, because it's extreme what I do and I train like an athlete to succeed in it. An adventurer, I don't know, I guess you could walk the width of Wales and call yourself an adventurer. So adventure doesn't sound very professional. So it's a weird one. It's an awkward one, actually. Yeah, because I'm like, oh, okay, what do I put down on the business card, for example, Well, when they were a thing, now it's all in the Instagram and the website, isn't it? But yeah, I guess we could also call it a sport. I like to, it probably wouldn't be classed as a sport, but I do like to see it as a, kind of like a sport, but rather than winning or losing, it's a case of living or dying, so it's high. But yeah.
Well, even though you say that, is there a competitive element within the kind of adventurer community, I guess, though? Because I remember when you were talking about doing the Yangtze challenge, you were kind of going out there to try and find what's the biggest thing that hasn't been done, and let's go and do it. So is there a little bit of is that conscious in your mind, or is it just so that it's gets more attention and kind of helps your kind of career, I guess? Like, where does that fall in? Is it inter competitive or not?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a very good question. I would say, for the first few years that I set off for my travels, there was I didn't even have a phone with me. There was no technology. I was just doing the adventures for the pure love and the pure passion of it. I wasn't sharing on Facebook, Instagram. I wasn't on Instagram or Twitter, actually. So yeah, again, that was just for the pure love and passion of adventure. But Mongolia was my first record, and that sort of spurred on the idea that I thought maybe I can continue doing what I love, doing what I'm passionate about, but as a potential career, which never really popped to mind when I was younger, But then that started to spur on. And it was only when I started to enter more into the adventure industry that I found that, it's very competitive. I like to call it healthy competition because, I'm very competitive myself, but not to a crazy degree. If someone came up to me now and said that they also plan to walk across Mongolia solo on the sport, and, for example, they can't do the first record because it's been done, but they want to do a speed record, I would happily help out logistics wise. I would help where I could, pretty much, But I do know that there's people in this industry that wouldn't do that, So yeah. I say competitive, but not silly competitive, because I think it's a big, beautiful world we live in. We should be there to help and support each other succeed. So yeah, my level of competition, it's the healthy style. But again, these expeditions that I took on, they were always there. I always decided to take them on first and foremost for the pure adventure, just because I thought Mongolia, solo, unsupported, how wild will that be? It was only when I realized and when I brought further teams on board and they started to do extensive research that we realized that this could potentially be a recorded first. That's when the stakes go higher again, and there's extra motive then, there's extra reason, isn't there? It hasn't been done. Why hasn't it been done? And can it even be done? So, you train harder knowing that something hasn't been done before, because anything can go wrong.
Do you think that's part of? So we've spoken to a lot of extreme sport athletes and people who compete in sports that aren't that dangerous, and you always tend to find the extreme ones where like death is a possibility. They're far more supportive. Like say if someone does like a triple corkscrew on a snowboard or something like that, it's all high fives afterwards, even though they might have just pinched the Olympic medal off of you. Whereas like if a French rider came to me and said, "Do you want to help me break the world record?" I'd be like, "Excuse me," you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I want to kind of tap into some of the kind of more general kind of challenges you can face. So let's kind of pin in on the kind of danger angle, I guess. So I guess when you're doing these various tricks, you're dealing with like extreme conditions from like I think from the research we found like from -20 degrees to +40, altitude sickness, theft, bears, malaria, sickness, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, pretty grim, eh?
Yeah.
But what is that just kind of part of the adventure for you, or part of the story, or like why put yourself through these kind of like intense kind of struggles and intense danger? I guess I know you've spoken about your mum before, kind of calling you up saying it's time to come home.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, for those. What I do, I guess a lot of people can see or perceive as actually being quite daredevilish or quite reckless or quite stupid. But what they don't see is obviously that you guys know yourself, the limelight, the show reel after completing that feat is what people see, and everyone's like, "Wow, I want to do that." But what they don't see is the real hardship behind the scenes. The difficulty and the struggle and the near deaths that went into achieving it. And with all of these expeditions that I'm planning, especially Mongolia, Madagascar, and the Yangtze, because they were the three biggest, it's a case of meticulous planning and attention to detail. It's not sort of going out there knowing, "Oh, I might die, but I might make it." If there's that little bit, that uncertainty in myself, that hang on, I'm not too sure how to come over this, how to overcome this obstacle, meaning I might not make it, meaning I might die, then I just won't do it. I've got to delay the expedition by a few weeks, a few months, and just really know how to prepare for that obstacle before I take it on. And so there is a lot of that involved. It's attention to detail. It's studying and researching every single challenge and obstacle that could potentially show up on the mission, and then just learning how I can possibly overcome it. We're also planning for worst case. What if I don't overcome it? What's the backup plan? And so that's why there is a lot of planning. So for the Yangtze, it was a year to execute. There was over 2 years to plan, just to make sure everything was in order and ready for me to attempt.
So it's kind of that fine balance between being kind of cavalier and having that informed decision making as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because of course you want to come back alive, and anything can go wrong. I do understand it's an adventure. So, for example, I was hoping not to catch malaria in Madagascar, but I did know that that's a possibility. I tried to prevent it. I was taking my anti-malaria, but we ended up in a village that had the bubonic plague, an ancient disease. They told us to stay in our tents, don't come out and cook. So we relied them on cooking food and bringing it to us, which they did. They were really hospitable. But the eel that they presented us was pretty rotten, but we were pretty hungry. So we ate it, and me and my two guides were just vomiting. We were suffering with diarrhea. So that means that these little anti-malarial pills, they would go in one way and they'd pop out the other side like almost instantly. So I didn't have that protection from the malaria. So that sounds just so unlucky, and it was unlucky. But again, these are the mishaps that can happen on these adventures, and so I always expect them.
Is there kind of like a sick version of kudos that comes along with getting various things? So like, like with cyclists, if someone has a big crash, most of the crowd are like, "Oh God, no," but we're like, "Let's see that again. That looked awesome." And Ranulph Fiennes is like famously lost a couple fingers to like frostbite and things like that as well.
Because fingers off, didn't he?
Yeah.
I got sick. The doctor was like, "Oh, give it time." He's like, "Sack that. I'll go and get my my bush trimmers from the garage."
But the reason I ask is just to try and like tap into that mindset a little bit. Like, you know, when you get diagnosed with malaria, that's probably not going to be received in the same way as if you're kind of Joe Public. You know what I mean? It's kind of just seen as another thing you get over, and it'll be a fun story to tell afterwards. Or do you kind of take it very seriously at the time? I'm just trying to find the balance between where we sit as athletes seeing horrific crashes and where you sit on that.
That's a great question. I've never had that, but there is definitely some truth in that. But with myself, like with the malaria one, no, I didn't think, where's my bucket list? I've ticked off malaria. I didn't think that, and I was in a bad way. But once I recovered, once I came back, once I knew it was out of my system fully, and I looked back, and then I'm going over these crazy stories of like spider bites, of being held up at gunpoint by the military, of avoiding the bandits via the jungle. All of these at that time were scary, and they were very serious and life-threatening. But then afterwards, they become stories, and they become pretty cool stories to talk about. You know, they're like, wow. And even now, when I'm telling you guys, I do look back and think, fucking hell, so much could have gone drastically wrong. But again, yeah, I guess you know, I'm also a public speaker. I guess if I didn't have the malaria story, I wouldn't have been able to give back to communities like Malaria No More UK. I became ambassador for. If I didn't show off on social media the beauty of Madagascar, I would have been announced as UK ambassador for the Madagascar tourism. You know, there's always little things that, whilst you're suffering and struggling at the time, you just never know what that could turn into in the future. And all of these stories now, I try to, I've toured across Asia, I've toured across the UK, done TED Talks. And I talk about these stories not in a way that, you know, I'm just saying you should also go to Madagascar and hack yourself in the jungle, but in ways that I make it relatable, in a way that we all face our own jungle in life, really, or our own Gobi Desert in life. And so, yeah, I always try to make it relatable and turn the stories into lessons that I learned from those, and how you can make them useful in day-to-day life.
It's really interesting to touch on the planning angle, because obviously that's a huge part of this pursuit. But you know, obviously you can only plan for so much. So what happens when it comes to contingency? When, for instance, you know, we've heard about you losing like 6 members of your film crew within the first couple of days. You know, going back to the malaria thing, wolves stalking you, all that kind of stuff. Like, how do you bounce back from something like that?
I guess it's probably the mental preparation that I do potentially at home. So I've done all of my training in just my back garden, my garage, a lot of calisthenics, a lot of beating the tractor tire up with the sledgehammer, flipping it, building up inner core durability. And whilst I'm doing that, I'm picturing worst case scenario. I'm thinking of what can go wrong. For example, like you said, if there's going to be wolves, you know, for myself, I would almost try to picture what I would be like if those wolves attacked. You know, if there's going to be snow blizzards or sandstorms, I'm almost trying to visualize the biggest and the baddest sandstorms, you know, not because I wanted to face the biggest, but if I'm thinking of worst case scenario, and then worst case scenario was to strike when I'm out on the field, then it doesn't come as a shock. It doesn't come as it's taken me by surprise, because it hasn't. It's come as something I did anticipate, I did visualize, I did know could happen. Now, all as I must do is learn to crack on and try to tackle on through it. And I guess it's like that with everything, you know, I think the human body, it panics or gets jumped or spooked or scared when something happens to it that it wasn't expecting. You know, like if your mate pranks you and jumps around the corner and scares you, if you knew he was there, you're not gonna scream. You know, you're gonna say, well, you know, you're right. But if they jump around the corner and you weren't expecting it, you're gonna scream, you're gonna panic because you weren't expecting it. So that's the way that I prepare mentally. Just picture a worst case scenario, my biggest fears, playing them over and over again. I'm pretty much shitting myself up. You know, I'm trying to make myself as scared as possible, because I know that as scared as I will be back here training, only thinking about Mongolia, that's not going to be on the level that it will be when that thing happens, you know. So I would say the mental preparation. And once you do get it, once you do contract malaria, for example, you're right, you know, I had my mum and dad on the phone, like saying, what you're doing, this isn't just a flu, you know, it's not a cold, it's the biggest killer in human history as far as diseases go. Get yourself back home, recover, and then go back out to Madagascar. Because I caught malaria in the first month of the 5-month journey. So I still had 4 months left to go, and I'd lost 13 kilograms in the space of 6-7 days. But I knew I was in safe hands. Unfortunately, they do, over there, the doctors do have to help people with malaria on a daily basis. So as long as I could recover, I could crack on. And that's all I kept visualizing, is that end goal. Like, there wasn't a day that went by that I couldn't see me crossing that finish line. And so in times of difficulty like that, I just try my best to stay focused, manage my expectations, break it down day by day, and keep going.
And when it comes to that mindset, a lot of that actually seems to ring true with sports psychology, I guess. I know that, like, Olympic Games obviously pales in comparison to facing almost certain death.
But it's
different challenge. But like, that's the actual kind of going through the worst case scenario is one of the exercises that we do to try and kind of come to terms with the challenge we're facing.
And the pressures as well. There's like with mine, there's the pressures of, not necessarily from the public, because it's a 155-day journey, but with yours, it's in such a short time. Within an hour, you can know what position you're going to be in. You know, you're going to know the outcome, and the pressure of people watching you. Again, there's that struggle too, isn't there? You know, I can imagine.
No, for sure. But my question relating to that was, is that kind of been self-taught? Is that kind of been a mindset for you? Because when we join a program, it's almost instantly prescribed. It's like, if you're worrying about something, let's write down all the worst case scenarios, get it in perspective, then move forward. How did you develop that mindset over time?
Yeah, that's another great question, really. No, it was never really taught. I'd say it was just developed. Just through making mistakes, really, you know, cracking on. But yeah, you know, I think over the years of different adventures, I just developed my mindset, and things grew quite organically and quite gradually, from, you know, being in high school here, just being very sporty, to then being in the outdoor education course in college, a 2-year course, sort of working on my craft, learning that I was far more of a kinesthetic learner, hands-on practical experiences, making mistakes but never making the same mistake twice. And then when I set out and I was taking on these sort of wild, reckless and dangerous journeys, really, you know, crossing countries via the jungle, you know, where there's no border control, learning how to survive in the jungle with Burmese hill tribes or whatnot, I'd say all of these did play a part in gradually toughening up my mindset, you know, that when it came to the pressures of these bigger expeditions, I had climbed the ladder. I didn't jump in effectively at the deep end. There were different previous, I think on the body as well. I think your body definitely remembers harsh experiences like facing dehydration before, or facing sleep deprivation. I think your body does naturally get tougher, kind of like muscle memory too, you know. And so I guess I've just tried to perfect it, and I'm still learning, of course. But yeah, trying to perfect it as I go, challenge by challenge.
In a way, that makes it more impressive that you've kind of settled on what's quite a well-known sports psychology mindset just by accident, I guess. Then it's
yeah, and I was tested once. There was a team of people who wanted to test my mindset, and at first I was a little bit hesitant by this, because I thought, well, no, because if that test says that I'm good at this, but I'm bad at that, then that could affect my decision making on an expedition. Can you imagine? Oh no, don't worry, guys. I did a graph once and it said that I was fantastic at crossing rivers, and then I go to cross it and I'm swept away and die. So, but that test was, I was highlighted green in all certain scenarios, but the one that popped up red was my risk taking. So that highlighted as a concern to the team in London, and they said, you know, this is highlighted to like extreme. So you're more likely to take dangerous risks on your expeditions. But they said, but whilst most people's counterbalance, so decision making, is also red, that's when it's almost suicidal on these trips. He says, but weirdly enough, yours is green. It's usually red and red, but yours is red and green. So whilst your risk taking is red, your decision making to get yourself out of that situation is green. And so that was always weird. And then I do look back at the times that I, you know, could have or maybe should have died with dehydration in the Gobi Desert, but managed to take the right stepping stones to navigate my way out of that scenario, or catching malaria and having to walk a few days with the disease. until I reached the nearest community that had overland transport. Little things that, maybe I have taken some big risks, but fortunately I've managed to get myself out. And all of this sort of stuff does fascinate me as well. The whole mindset behind it. At the end of the day, it's probably 50-50 or 60-40. 60% mindset, 40% physical. I'd say it is in your sport.
Well, I was going to ask Phil because something that rang true a little bit there was you saying you have hesitance about examining that mindset in the first instance. And I've always been a big fan of sports psychology, but Phil, you've always kind of just got a system that works and you don't really engage in it.
Well, normally I prepare myself at home. Sometimes I visualize my races and stuff. So if something goes wrong, now I know what to do, and it seems to work. Normally I sit with a sports psychologist, and they tell me their ideas of things, how it should work. I can't seem to figure it out what they mean with it. So yeah.
So you found your own way and it's working. So
I found my own way. Yeah, that works for me.
Yeah, that's ace. Yeah, and I guess we're all completely different, aren't we? We have our own different structures, different ways.
But that's the interesting point you bring up about the whole kind of color psychological analysis thing, because that test is fundamentally based on the general public, and the general public aren't going to be trekking across China, are they? It's kind of like, I'd almost be quite surprised if you didn't have a red box into this category. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, it was initially made for athletes, and they decided to go to adventure and extreme athletes to see if there was a difference, and so that's why they were doing all of these tests, and they found that with the athletes would show up more red in more areas, because it was more team based. So they were saying, whilst we're out there in the wilderness, we're sort of relying on ourselves for the nutrition, relying on ourselves for the mindset, for the fitness plan, because we're out there alone type of thing. But with athletes, is they're doing also a lot of relying on the team members. And if there's one kink in the circle or in the chain, it's that circle, it affects you. So it was more down to doing teamwork, and it was with that teamwork that there was more red highlights. So I guess then that depends on how strong the team is. The better the team, the more green the circle is going to be. So it was super fascinating, really, to see all of that.
No, for sure. It's a total Once you start on that topic, it's quite tricky to stop on that one. But I want to pick up on so we've kind of established that in your opinion it's kind of 60% mind, 40% body. So let's talk about the physical aspect for a second. Because what's the kind of furthest distance you'd be walking in a day, given that you're not having to hack through a forest in Madagascar? It's pretty big distances, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say. Christ, I think even in Mongolia, when I became walking fit with the trailer behind, it's 18 stone, 120 kilograms. So that's the same weight as a heavyweight boxer. That's the same weight as Anthony Joshua, pretty much. It was ridiculous. And I was a lot skinnier, a lot weaker as well. But I became walking fit, and just on flat terrain on the steppe where there was more of a gravel track, I think I covered 50 kilometers that day, which is what's that? That's just over 30 miles, isn't it? I would have thought, and that was with the trailer. On a standard day, I have covered 90 kilometers before now, which is over 45 miles. And just because I was excited to get to the village, I heard that there was probably people that could cook me up a decent meal instead of a ration pack, So I was gone straight there. And so, you can cover once you're walking fit. You can, but I was shocked again. Like I was never really. It's the walking I find the boring, which sounds crazy because I've done over 7,000 miles of walking, so it sounds true. But the walking is just the boring bit, That's not the bit that interests me. It's the survival, it's the challenges, it's the people I meet and come across, because I love meeting new people, different cultures, different traditions. I'd say that's the real crux of it. That's the magic. But the walking is the bit that gets you to wild places where bikes and vehicles can't get you,
That's kind of one of my questions, though, is that with the Yangtze trek, obviously for the last third of the journey, it was very social. You were in cities, all that kind of stuff. But for the first, third to 2/3, that's extremely isolated. Do you cope? I mean, it's kind of quite topical to where we're sitting at the moment. But do you cope quite well with that kind of? Are you happy with your own company? Are you happy with that isolation, or does it actually present quite a big challenge to you?
Yeah, no, I'd say I'm. before I did the Mongolia, I was always worried. I didn't know how I would react. I think Mongolia was the biggest challenge for me mentally because I didn't know how I would react to any of the situations that I was potentially about to face. And all of my previous adventures was done with a mate of mine called Matt. So I did have a lot of fears there, a lot of challenges. But when I was out there, I realized that I did cope. I'm a positive guy anyway. And even when I'm alone, I'm all about structuring a routine out, covering that distance, taking it day by day. And, there were odd times where I'm feeling lonely. I think in Mongolia, I went over 8 days without seeing a single person, But at the same time, during that instance, I was there saying, well, don't moan about it. I might never, ever get to experience covering that vast distance and not seeing a single soul for 8 days ever again. That might be the only time ever in my life that I go such a long time and cover such a long distance without seeing anyone. So I do also try to appreciate and live in the moment as well. But yeah, if there's challenges like the bears and the wolves and I'm alone, that's a pretty shitty scenario to be in. I wish I was with someone right now.
But talking that like accumulative mental and physical fatigue, like I've just got an interesting kind of question that, say if you'd done the Yangtze challenge backwards, you'd started in the city and then you slowly became more and more isolated. Do you think that would have been almost like a bigger challenge? Because it's almost like you're getting closer to the mouth of the river. There's more home comforts. There's more people to speak to. Would that make it even more challenging, having that accumulative isolation?
It's another great question, and it could unfold two ways. It could be that effectively it's easier because I'm gradually, step by step, breaking into the wilderness. And so I would be able to get comfortable with the uncomfortable fairly fast. Whereas doing it from source to sea, I'm sort of dropped out in the middle of the Tibetan plateau over 5,100 meters. And effectively, I've got to walk then for another 3 to 4 months until I'm relatively safe from -20, from landslides, snow blizzards, bears, wolves, the lot. And so I think going from source to sea with the 2.5 months delay that I had could have potentially been avoided if I did it from mouth to source, because that means I would have been able to stop pretty much straight away because there's no permits. No visas needed to go to Shanghai, of course. And so whilst I'm walking, my team in Beijing could have effectively sorted out all of the permits because I'm not there for another 6 months anyway. And so maybe that would have been easier. But physically, maybe more challenging because it's even more up the mountains, although I did climb a lot of mountains along the way, believe it or not. But yeah, so it could unfold two ways, for sure.
I mean,
just to take it completely off topic for a second, I did have a specific question to you about China and permits, because Phil and I have been there. And we had a pretty horrible time and aren't planning to go back. So if you'd like to convince us to go back to China, that'd be good. But the reason was that we arrived in Beijing airport and they confiscated all of our bikes because they said that we were planning to sell them and they wanted an import duty, which was 40% of the value of each bike. Now, the problem was that we'd already told them how much the bikes were worth. So we were saying, it's about 25k a box. And they were like, perfect. So we need 40% of the value of like 50 boxes, basically. But like dealing with all those permits and stuff like that, like the Chinese system is very black and white. It's like this is either happening or it isn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Big challenge for you, obviously.
Yeah, it is like that. And they're so by the books as well. I would say I've been to many countries before where you could effectively buy yourself a visa, buy a permit, slip the money under the table and that's it. But China, it just does not work. It doesn't matter if you're Brad Pitt. I've known celebrities, I won't mention names, but I know big name celebrities who've been kicked out the country, refused a visa, concerts cancelled. They just don't care how much money you've got, what name you are. They're just so by the books, it is what it is type of thing. And so that's why the permits and the visas are just so crucial. And that's why it took over 2 years to plan. Just picture this to put into perspective. Don't know if I should be saying this, but to put into perspective, I had to effectively become a doctor in order to get access to the source. And so they had to go run me through as a temporary doctor for a year to be ambassador for the Green Development Foundation, an organisation that if I was ambassador with them, they could then give me access to the Qinghai government. And then that spurred on the Qinghai government access. And if I get access to the Qinghai government, which I did, he gives me access to the authorities for protection. And if I get access to the authorities for protection, the list goes on and on and on. So effectively, I had to carry 14 different stamped and signed permits and documents that if I get, seen by the police, pulled off the mountains by the police, which I did over 5 times, taken to government officers for question. I've got the documents. I've got everything. They couldn't do me for anything. I was so fully backed up and had the biggest teams out there supporting me on this that the police couldn't do anything but apologise and let me go back to where they from,
Mate, we had the British Embassy, British Airways, like going down there every day trying to get our bikes out. It didn't make a single bit of difference.
Yeah, man.
like a baby for competition.
We did. Well, we had to pay.
Oh, really? Yeah, there was.
Yeah, so the whole team had to get their credit cards out as a deposit and had to try and reclaim it before the flight home. But then they were very slow at giving the money back. The flight was boarding.
So it got a little bit tense.
Just because they thought you were going to sell them.
Well, they decided we were, so they wanted the import duty as a deposit.
It's bad, then. Yeah.
The most annoying bit was, in the velodrome, they had some watt bikes that we could train on. So we were like, okay, we don't have bikes, but at least we can use these. First day, disappear. That's it. And then we were like, okay, we're truly fucked now, basically.
Yeah, don't sound. I would say that you just got caught out by an unlucky scenario with that. Yeah, for sure. Did you meet the locals as well? Like Beijing is probably one of the harshest cities as well. It's very political there. But even in Beijing, the locals are nice. But outside of Beijing, man, it's just, I do recommend it. Please don't judge China off Beijing and that experience. You would love it as a country for sure, really. And the people are usually amazing. Very friendly.
Now, I've done like amazing stuff in like Hong Kong and things like that. I know that's kind of half and half China Western kind of thing. But yeah, when we went to Beijing, the smog was really bad. It wasn't. We all got food poisoning, especially Phil.
Yeah. What year was that?
2010 and 2011. I've been there.
Yeah, 2010 I was there as well. And man, I was hit as well by the air quality in 2010. It was bad. It's changed again now. It's improved loads. But in 2010, man, I remember taking a shower as well because it was so humid. I came outside and instantly I was wet. Like I just jumped back into the shower. It was humid. The air quality was bad. But yeah, there's been big changes the past decade. I think you'd be shocked if you're going back now.
Yeah.
We go on little holidays together. We've been to Rio and Berlin and stuff. So maybe we can check out Rio, China next or something like that.
Yeah.
I bought some great T-shirts and sunglasses in this fake supermarket thing.
What's that?
In that fake supermarket, there's like this big 4-story building is just full of fake clothing and handbags and shoes and everything.
Yeah, probably. I heard that Michael Jordan was pretty ripped off quite bad because he didn't copyright his face, and so his face was printed on everything, all merchandise, because basketball is the biggest sport out there, and pretty much they sell, I don't know, billions of dollars worth of Michael Jordan's face. And China is a different market. He tried to sue, he tried to get the money back. Not a chance.
Phil came back with a bucket load of sunglasses. I won't mention the brand name, but the first half of it is a tree. And like he was so smug with himself, but he'd had these like constant headaches. And I was like, Phil, like these lenses, like one's like plus 20, one's like minus 20. Like why? To take it back on topic, like, so when you were kind of going, like, we always look at the kind of inspiration of the guests we get on to get into whatever it is they do, and we also try and talk through how other people can get into it, because we deal with a lot of niche sports and some of them are super difficult. But so when you were growing up, did you have like an inspiration moment? Did you kind of idolize, explorers like Fine, Shackleton, Livingston, or was it, or why do you do it? Is it like an environmental bit? Is it just the freedom of it all, or kind of coming out of a small town in Wales? Like, where do you sit on that?
Yeah, another great question, to be honest. And again, it just happened so organically. I didn't really know my ancient explorers. Didn't really know any of these names. I would just hear stories from other people and I had an uncle who lived in Zimbabwe, South Africa, and he used to tell me these mental stories of my granddad lived in Pakistan for 22 years, so he had these crazy stories. I used to see documentaries on TV, like David Attenborough stuff, and I didn't want to watch it from a screen. I wanted to be out there amongst it. And it wasn't any one of these things. It was just lots of little things similar to those that I just explained that might have played an important part. It was the love of sport as well in school, the love of competition, mixed with the curiosity and love for the world and wanting to get out there. And I think combining the sports and competition with these sort of travels and adventures brings on these sort of extreme endeavors. But again, it took many years. It took working here in just a fish and chip shop, then waiting on, and then a lifeguard. I sold my car. And the money I used from my car, I used to invest in myself, because I knew if I went traveling, I would have come back and everyone would have got their degrees, they would have finished university, they would have moved on with their lives, with their careers, and I'd be stuck there, applying for a job back at lifeguard or a fish and chip shop. So I knew that I needed to invest in myself. So I got my scuba diving qualifications, and the plan was, when I was 16, the plan was to be a snowboard instructor and a scuba dive instructor, and then I would mix up travel with the different seasons, maybe teach in Canada, then go out to somewhere in Asia. But then things started to develop. I went off. First place was China when I was 19, sort of traveling on a shoestring budget. I said to my friend, this is great, but we're sharing the same stories, photos and experiences as all of the rest of the travelers, We need our own unique experience, but we don't have the budget really to create anything cool. But then I suggested, why don't we buy the most ridiculous looking bicycles we can, cycle Cambodia and Vietnam? And so I would say that was the catalyst. That was probably the inspiration. That Cambodia and Vietnam cycle, I believe, changed everything. My friend sort of laughed and said, sounds great, but on what bikes? And as he said that, there was an old lady cycling behind her. Bike was making all sorts of crazy screeching noises. It was rusty as anything. It almost looked like it was about to cave in any meter. But it looked affordable. I said, this is perfect. Let's go purchase 2 of those. Attempt to cycle the 1,130 miles that it was. And we did. We bought bikes for £10. We had no pump. We had no puncture repair kit. We had no map, no technology. We had a little basket, a little bell. No gears, no suspension, string on the side of the road that we found, and we used that to strap the rucksack onto the back. And off we went. We were just asking the locals. We were pointing Hanoi, that's where we were aiming for, the capital, Hanoi. And even though we were over 1,000 miles away, the locals would, that way, or this way. That's how we made our way. And we were chased by dogs. We were hit by mopeds. We were dodged by lorries. We cycled over 39 hours straight. On one stint, we looked an absolute mess that we were turned down by 7 different hostels and guest houses because we looked like we were on drugs. But we made it, after 15 days, I think it was. We had made it. The bikes broke 17 times in total, but me and my friend, we couldn't stop banging on about that experience. We were like, whoa, that was insane. And there was always something so satisfying about when we were cycling, we would see the coaches. Sometimes if we were on the beaten road where the coaches usually go past carrying hordes of tourists, they'd be watching a movie or falling asleep or curtains drawn, and then missing out on all of this beauty that Vietnam has to offer. And we were mixing with the locals. I remember the locals pulling our leg hairs because obviously they've seen Westerners before. It's not one of those countries, but they were able to get close and they were able to mix and mingle without tour guides shoving them off, and so they were just sat down, curious. It was a little bit irritating. They were pulling our hair, pulling our leg hairs, and whilst we're starving, me and my friend trying to eat. But just an amazing experience. And then after that, I was like, wow, man, this is my niche. This is my passion. I want to continue these adventures somehow. And I just forgot to stop, and here I am.
Did you wear any cycling clothes for that bike ride, or did you just do it in plain, normal clothing?
Yeah, no, it was, I remember it being a rock hard seat that I used my fleece to strap around the seat to make it a little bit more soft. Yeah. I took a vest, which was so bad. My shoulders were ridiculously burnt. And I took I think they were just surfboarding shorts. And off I went. It was crazy. It was mental, man. Even the pedals fell off. The bike was so ridiculous. pedals would drop off occasionally.
It's fine on the downhills. That's funny interacting with the locals, because when my brother came out to that trip that we were on in China, and he was about 14 years old, had a mop, and everyone thought he was Justin Bieber, so he was getting stopped
photos all the time in Tiananmen Square.
They were all taking selfies with him.
Yeah, exactly. And he was like, I don't really get what's going on, but anyway.
So I guess for people who are like thinking about getting into it, obviously this whole kind of adventure shoestring angle has actually become quite popular. I mean, I know the actual practicalities of doing it at the moment are fundamentally on hold, but one of the most popular TV shows in the UK at the moment is kind of Race Across the World, where it's all about managing budget and things like that. And when it comes to backpacking and budget, people always think, how much am I going to need per day? So I'm quite interested to know for that Vietnam trip, like how shoestring is shoestring, like how little money did you manage to kind of see that country on?
So on average, I reckon we were spending about £3 per day.
Oh, wow.
£3 per day. And not really just because we needed to, but it's just because we were off the tourist route. We would get noodles, 20, 30 pence. I guess we would probably have that twice a day. We'd throw in a sausage if we wanted for an extra 10 pence. Accommodation, we had our tent, which we found out the hard way. It wasn't waterproof. Hammock shops we could also stay in. So these are sort of like big shelters. It's all open just with a shelter for the rain. And hammocks are all set up inside. And, you pay the equivalent of 20 pence. And you can stay there for the whole night. And so we would literally just get a few pound per day on average, I would say.
So the advice for someone wanting to do it is don't be precious about luxuries and just go for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people allow the budget to stop them from doing these adventures. Sometimes it can provide an even better adventure, because I think even that Vietnam cycle, it's even funnier, even more ridiculous that we did use those bikes. At the time, that it was what it was. We couldn't afford anything more, so we just, dealt with what we had. But now looking back, it's like maybe even if I had all of the gear, I don't know if it would be as cool of a story, So sometimes by doing it low budget, now that's changed. Of course, I can't be doing that with Mission Yangtze. But back then, yeah, man, we didn't plan it. We used an internet cafe. We looked on Google at all of the different towns that we were hoping to come across on the Vietnam cycle, and we would literally write those town names down. And that's it. Then we would just show the locals, and the locals would point us for the 1,000 miles, the direction that we need to go to get to the next town or city or village, literally nothing. And that was the catalyst for me. Even the Burmese Hill tribe, where we crossed from the Thai jungle into the Myanmar jungle, there was a community. They took us in. They were teaching us how to hunt, how to gather. So, no shops there. We weren't spending any money. How to build rafts and shelter using natural resources, even down to the mosquito repellent. Berries on trees that if you pull the berries off and rub them over your hand, that's like 50% DEET. So there's no money spent there either. You can do a lot of things very cheap. I'm glad I'm not in that state anymore, of course, but I think I needed to get there in order to get where I'm at today, for sure.
Well, that kind of brought me to my next question, I guess, because that form of exploring with minimal budget actually sounds quite pure, I guess. Do you ever have like a little bit of a yearning to go back to that situation, kind of ditch the social media updates, ditch the camera crew, and it's just you and your mate back with a broken bike in Vietnam?
Yeah, sometimes. So I do tell my friend, he's based in Hong Kong now, but I do tell him, I don't know because it also has become like work. So, but in a great way, do I do an adventure when that's my career, that's my main way of living? Would I do that and not take the opportunity to actually be able to promote, partner, share the journey? Is one of those. But in terms of the budget, no, I don't. Only because I suffered for many years with that budget, that it's enough, that it's still in my blood. I'll always remember it. I think even if I was a multi-millionaire, I would still be like, yeah, but there's no point paying £200 for a night in accommodation. You know, I would still look at it like that. I think it's in my blood, you know. But yeah, I think those adventures are definitely still there. I would love to take on more just random adventures on a bicycle, cheap bike, and go potentially. Yeah.
And can we talk about like it's a slightly loaded term in the adventure world, which is solo and unassisted, because you know everyone watches Bear Grylls and is kind of like, I bet there's a 5-star hotel down the corner, and all that kind of stuff. So when you declare something as solo or unassisted, when you have people there to document the experience, you know what does that mean? Are they completely hands off, just filming, or is there a balance to be struck? Where does that sit?
Yeah, so with Mongolia, that was the only solo and unsupported trek. So Madagascar wasn't, because I had different guides on different locations. And Mission Yangtze wasn't, because that wasn't a record to do it solo. That was just a record to actually walk the whole thing, whether people choose to join or not. So Mongolia was the only solo and unsupported. And what that means, so solo, so there was no one trekking with me at all, not even for one of the days. And unsupported me, and in fact, yeah, solo, there was not even a van. I know that people sometimes do unsupported trips, but they've got a van in front of them or behind them.
Yeah, so John who goes to Land's End, you can do it unsupported or solo, but you can have a support car at each stop or something like that.
So you're still doing it solo, aren't you? But the unsupported isn't a factor because you've got the team there. So with myself, yeah, it was unsupported, so there's no van, there's no people. In fact, my only escape, my only backup would have been a text only to my agent who lives out there, who's based in the capital city of Ulaanbaatar, and I would need to then allow him for at least 3 to 4 days to get to me if he finds me in time. So that's, yeah. So this is why this was so dangerous. I know the previous guy that attempted it, I'm sure his wife was Russian, so he had access to the military out there.
That's a pretty cool contact.
Yeah, so I'm sure he escaped by helicopter, I think. That wasn't an option for me, one, because of the budget, two, because of the contacts. And so, yeah, solo on my own, so even self-filming. So I'd have to take the tripod out of my trailer, set the camera up, walk ahead of it whilst it's filming for a couple of 100 meters, take off my trailer, run back for the camera to pick it up, run back to the trailer to pack it, trailer back on, carry on walking. So I say I did 1,500 miles, but I probably did a lot more than that.
Have you had times out in Mongolia where you thought, I'm not going to make it? Or
there was a very scary time. Yeah, so it was 3 weeks over the Altai Mountains. It was 5 weeks across the Gobi Desert and 3 weeks through the Mongolian steppe. And the time in the Gobi Desert, I started to run lower and lower on water. And the weeks went by. I was dehydrated. I was slipping into heat exhaustion. I was on my way to heat stroke, which is usually fatal. And my worst point out there was I was delirious. I was hallucinating. I could almost feel my organs drying up through lack of fluids. I had this big 20-litre container of water, but one of the wells was dry. I had to then push on to the next confirmed water source. And I was sort of rationing my last remaining of dribbles of water, if you like. And I remember just resting under my trailer because there was no breeze, there was no shade. It was 40 plus degrees Celsius. The tires were now sinking into the often gravel, but also often soft sand, making it feel like I was pulling a concrete block through hell. I was skinnier, I was weaker. And I would spend an hour at a time underneath my trailer. And it was at this point, well, not this point, but many where I just kept hiding under my trailer for long periods of times that I realized if I don't keep getting out from under my trailer and pushing on, I'm going to die out here in the Gobi Desert. You know, my only option. And at that point, I had even missed the point of backup because my first option was either text my logistics manager, hope that he finds me within 3 or 4 days, and then he's got another 2 days to get me out, let's say 6 days. Or at this point, I know that I'm guaranteed 4 walking days from the next community. And I didn't believe I could last 6 days. And so my only option was to get out from under my trailer and walk my way. Otherwise, I believed I wasn't going to make it at all. And whilst I couldn't, and this is a good one as well for your listeners, for the viewers, is whilst I couldn't visualize 4 days, because I'm a big believer in, you know, the visualization, the law of attraction, all of that. I couldn't visualize. I was just in too much agony. I can't explain the pain that I was in, and just I was out of my mind as well. Whilst I couldn't visualize that, I could visualize 100 meters. I could see 100 meters. So I started to break my goals down again, something I did to help me travel in the first place, something I've used on all of my adventures. And so I decided to rest no more than 5 minutes under my trailer and walk for 100 meters, because that's all I could manage, and then hide for another 100 meters. And by breaking and then rest for another 5 minutes. So breaking my goals down and concentrating on 100 meters walking and 5 minute resting, I did eventually make it to that community. I was in a bad way. Lucky to make it there. I was off the radar then for a good 8 days trying to recover. But yeah, effectively by breaking the goals down, I managed to survive that difficulty. I bucked up the courage and the strength again after those 8 days, although I was very fearful to push on after that scare. I did push on and managed to complete it, make it back alive.
And is it hard to keep a straight train of thought when you're in that state? Because I guess like one of, I'm just going from like watching Tintin cartoons from when I was younger, but like when you've got heat stroke and you're in the desert, people talk of like mirages, hallucinations, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I did. I was in a bad. I didn't see any mirages though. I don't think, because I did know it was a fact that I think you'd probably see mirages if you're lost in the Gobi in a desert and you don't really know what's where. But I knew that it on the maps there was nothing in between. There was only that community. So I was just trying to stay focused on the fact that that's where I need to get to. There's nothing between. There's just that. And so effectively, I only stuck to one option, and that one option was just to survive, just to break the goals down, just to get to that community. And so whilst I was suffering and I was delusional, delirious, again, I knew why I was, and I knew what I needed to do. And it was just to ignore all of that, stick to the routine. I don't even remember really thinking about loved ones. Family, friends. I was just so fixated on getting the job done and making it to that community that it really helped me to stay focused. It kept my mind on track, I would say, because you're right, my mind could have wandered into all sorts of dark areas, but I just stayed disciplined.
That's amazing. And I want to talk about, so obviously there's a huge amount of mental and physical stress after you've done one of these expeditions, excuse me. And I want to kind of go through the kind of life cycle of being an adventurer, because I guess to me, just kind of lazily examining it, you've kind of got planning, execution, and then you've kind of got to make a bit of cash off the back of it. So it's media tours, it's raising awareness, all that kind of stuff. Do you find it quite difficult to jump straight from, because obviously there's a limited time of relevance, so you have to jump pretty much straight from the expedition into a PR campaign, don't you?
Yeah, man. And especially with this latest one, Mission Yangtze, I had to cancel my own celebration event. We booked out the whole sort of, what was it? Sort of like on the riverbank, like this big sort of pub restaurant type thing. But I was just so mad busy with interviews that it's not one of those that you say to the BBC World News, can you call me back tomorrow? You take those interviews, and it just went mental. It just blew up. There was interviews from all over the world, and we don't do the expedition to then just celebrate at the end. We've still got a job to do. So it was about spreading that news, getting that awareness out there, hopefully shedding some light, different light on China, hopefully some motivation, inspiration, all of that. And for the environmentalists, the conservationists, just the journey in general. And so, I made the decision to cancel the celebration event, and I was up till 3 a.m. Taking interviews, because different time zones, of course. And then it followed on to the next day. And then when I came back to the UK, it was like the one show was Good Morning Britain. I then shot back. I was only in the UK, I think, for 2 weeks before I then shot back out to Asia. And I was doing a speaking tour in Myanmar, Singapore, Korea, China. And so it was just mental, but I loved it. It almost didn't give me time to reflect on the journey and what just happened. But I didn't mind that. It had been a whole year of walking. I had plenty of time to sort of reflect on last month and the month before and so on. And so I just grabbed the bull by the horns and went for a year with all of these different opportunities, because that's what they are. They're opportunities to get the story further out there, which is great.
Yeah, no, it's a really good way to approach it, that you've got an opportunity to share something, because I think a lot of athletes look at it almost like a chore and unnecessary. I'm sure when you're asked for the 20th time in a media round, how did it feel to win Olympic gold, it can feel a little bit
boring, but
yeah,
I'm sure you get chucked with the same kind of short-term questions just to get a soundbite. But out of that cycle, from the planning, execution, and the tour afterwards, what's the kind of real passion for you? Like, is it just about the adventuring and the other stuff are kind of niceties, or allow that adventure to happen, or is there a bit that you kind of would rather do without? Like, where do you sit on that kind of life cycle of your career?
I would say at the minute it's really well balanced in terms of it is 50% adventure and it's 50% business. The 50% adventure ticks off all the boxes. It's the travel, it's the exploration, the culture, traditions, as I said, the different challenges. And then the 50% business I love as well, because that's the book, that's sharing the journey, that's interviews. I love talking to people and meeting new people, as it is anyway. But I like that marketing side, that branded side, the corporate side as well, I wasn't so keen into that, but I'm getting more and more keen into that, because I know that's part of it. And so at the minute, I'm liking it all, and I'm liking the direction it's taken. In the future, maybe, well, no, definitely, I look to do shorter trips, because 352 days is pretty ridiculous. And so we're looking now for TV and TV series to, reach the larger audience, to keep in the concepts as well, and all of the angles in terms of sustainability, environmental protection, etc. But to reach the masses, make it just as ambitious, just as extreme, but shorter, because, again, there's only so much time I can take out on business at the same time. And a mission of that magnitude, being a year to complete, is a hell of a time.
And kind of, it's interesting you talk about maybe doing like kind of shorter adventures and stuff like that, because I think, people tend to think of being an explorer as quite a historical job. You know what I mean? Like the first man to get to Everest, the first man to go to the South Pole, and then you were the first guy to walk the length of the Yangtze. But it kind of seems like a lot of the firsts and a lot of the mysteries of the world, either through technology or time, are kind of slowly eroded. So where do you kind of see the next frontier being, and the next frontier of adventure?
Sure.
Yeah, what's very heavy right now, I think, is there's a lot of adventurers and explorers now traveling. And what I like is what my friend said, Kyle, is almost the tagline, explore to conserve. So whilst we're not necessarily exploring to find new land, it's all mapped out, it's all been done type of thing. I believe we are sharing vital messages now on things that have changed the past decade or the past century. And with all of my expeditions, whether in Mongolia, I was raising funds for the Red Cross, also raising awareness for climate change and the effects that it has on the nomadic way of life. With Madagascar, I partnered up with the Lima Network Conservation to just highlight all the amazing work that they're doing to protect and preserve the unique biodiversity. And then with Mission Yangtze, we turned that much bigger. We partnered up with a number of different organizations, environmentalists, to include the WWF. And I think that is probably more the key now. It's doing it more so for a reason, to help to protect, to showcase, to highlight, to also provide positives as well. I believe the world can be full of negatives. You only have to switch on the TV and it's negative news. And so I always like to do it in a positive way. For example, with Madagascar, with the forests being set on fire, it's easy to focus and shout about, oh no, the forests are burning. But why also not highlight the 100 volunteers who are risking their lives to expand the national park, to protect the species living within, to put out the fires? So I believe we can raise awareness about the damage being done, but through stories of positive work, or the real unsung heroes actually doing their bit to try to defend and protect. So that's the way I like to go. So I think maybe that is a frontier right now. I think climate change is hot on everyone's radar, but also to showcase that it is still, a lot has been done, but there's still things out there that haven't been done. It's still a big, beautiful world, still lots to see and do. and it's a shame not to enjoy the world we live on. So it's those positive messages as well, and sharing other people's ways of lives and whatnot. So yeah, but I think people are more looking to speed records now, aren't they? Because there's not many firsts left, to be honest. There are definitely a few nuggets out there, but you know, a lot of the previous explorers have pretty much done them all, haven't they? You know, bloody Sir Alan Fine's being one of them.
Something that seems really important to you is engaging with the locals, because I think, you know, when it comes to people that are in that do what you do, you seem to take that to a new level, almost to the point where you're carrying a chicken up a mountain and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love it, and that's probably the initial spark of my travel. Probably going back to that Vietnam cycle was the biggest highlight with the people I met along the way. And ever since then, I always say that the people on your journey can either make or break your journey. Unfortunately, you know, they've always made it. They've always added those stories. They've always, you know, been a part of the biggest experiences on that journey. And yeah, just for that example then, you know, it's tradition to, I couldn't believe it when they were telling me, you know, in order to summit the highest mountain in Madagascar, called Madagascar, you must carry yourself a white cockerel, a living white cockerel. You must protect it, you must feed it, you must give it water. And they say by doing this, you'll make a safe ascent of the summit, because the chicken would have protected you from the bad spirits and witches of the forest. So as crazy as that is, I am all about respecting the local culture and traditions. So I took a male cockerel. I named it a girl's name, called him Gertrude. And Gertrude was with me for 2.5 weeks. I had to feed him, I had to give him water. He became fully domesticated. It was like a little pet dog. Would sleep on top of my tent as we're sort of hacking through this jungle, machete in hand, leeches and spiders dropping on top of us. Yeah, we set him free on the summit.
Did you give that a quick Google before you actually did it? Because it sounds a lot like what people might do to an apprentice or something like that, like go and get a long stand or something like that.
Yeah. It is something I did hear about before out to Madagascar, and I knew it was a thing. And then I was told by my logistics manager, then a few different people had heard of it, because that summit's not really, that mountain's never really climbed much. I think we were the second people there within the space of 2 or 3 years. You know, which is crazy, because it's not so much of a high mountain, and it's just difficult to get to, covered in jungle. But yeah, I was expecting. Otherwise, you'd see lots of white chickens on top, wouldn't you? I guess. Yeah. Maybe you could see white chickens, but I didn't. Gertrude was the only one up there at that time. But yeah.
So that respect for local culture, as well as kind of giving you a lot of personal gratification, do you think kind of showing that respect and that adherence to local culture puts you in good stead in terms of like access and understanding and delivering a better message when you're at the end of your journey?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because I get to see it from their eyes. So I'm not necessarily spreading my opinion and my thoughts. I'm almost shedding light on what the locals perceive it as, their stories, their experiences. And I like that. I like not just going with my jungle boots, sort of coming out and flaunting and shouting about how it is, how it was. I'm always learning from the locals, and I take messages and key messages from them and get to experience their way of life, their tradition, their food that they eat. And I really try to get involved, sort of take the jungle boots off and just get in there with them, type of thing. That when I do come out the other side of the expedition, I do also feel I've gained a lot more knowledge because of the locals, far more than I would have done if it was just a solo journey. And part of me with the Mongolia trip, I would have loved to have a guide with me who could translate, because I did learn far more in Madagascar than I did in Mongolia. And that was the simple fact that I had a guide during different sections who would join me, who could speak English, and I was actually able to converse and chat with communities. And some of these communities would initially scatter, they would run, they would see a white person and they would run in the bush, they would hide. Some never came out again until I left, but some gradually, made themselves present, and as scared as they were and nervous, they did communicate, which is crazy, for Madagascar. Maybe Papua New Guinea, maybe Amazon, but I didn't expect that. I was warned about it by my logistics manager out in Madagascar, but to actually see people sort of walking up towards you, and then all of a sudden drop everything, turn around, and like run down a steep mountain or run into the jungle because they're scared. It's crazy. But for the times that I did get to sit down with the locals, which was a lot of times, it was amazing because I learned so much having the translator there.
Did you, in Madagascar, did you see any witches or anything like that?
There's a weird story. I didn't, and I was always dismissive of it. As I'd sort of laugh at it, and my guides would be like, "What are you laughing at?" But there was a time, and it's pretty unexplainable, I guess. There was a time where, so my story is, so we were in the middle of the jungle, high up in the mountains. This is in the interior of the island, and we came across a community just with their mud huts and wooden huts in the jungle. Nice place, nice friendly locals. There was probably only about 20, 30 people. We went to sleep that night. We were in a hut, so it was my photographer's porter, my photographer, me, and my guide sort of sleeping on this wooden or mud floor. And come 1, 2 o'clock, sometime in the middle of the morning, I woke up and saw Max, who's my guide, walking back into the hut, even though we should have been sleeping in the hut. He walked into the hut with a machete in hand and a torch in the other. And I was just like, "Well, what are you doing?" And he was like, "Oh, nothing, go back to sleep." So I did. I woke up. And now his story, he said he woke up at about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. He turned to the right, and apparently me, Suzanne, and Leva, my photographer and porter, her porter, were convulsing. Apparently all three of us were convulsing in our sleep. We were shaking, and he was trying to wake us up. And apparently we just weren't waking up. He looked out towards the door, and this door is sort of like cracked, sort of wooden planks, but cracks in between. And it was full moon as well, which makes it even creepier. And he said he saw a silhouette. And he said there was this lady stood outside, and he was like shouting at her in Malagasy, and she wouldn't move away from the door. And then he clicked and put 2 and 2 together, looked at her and looked at us. We were still convulsing. And he got up with his machete, walked towards the door with a torch as well. And apparently she gave off like this weird little snigger and started to run away. He ran out of the hut. He started running after her. And then apparently she entered the jungle and poof, she just disappeared. He said he didn't know where she went. He's a bit of an athlete as well. He's a sprinter. He's a fast runner. She just outran him, did him completely over. He comes back into the hut and he said, "And that's when you woke up, Ash, and you said, 'What am I doing?' I said, 'Go back to sleep.'" And then I started laughing, like, what a stupid story, what a crazy story. I was like, "What, so you chased a witch into the jungle?" And he was like, "Yeah," but then all of the locals started gathering and listening into the story because he had translated it in Malagasy, and they all had similar stories. Suzanne, my photographer, who is originally from Brussels, was terrified. She was like, "Oh my God, I'm not sleeping alone in my tent ever again. I'm always staying in one of your guys' tents." She was freaked out. I was just a little bit, "Come on, don't be silly." And then I said, why weren't you convulsing?" And he was like, "Well, because Gertrude was sleeping next to me." Gertrude.
You believe him?
And actually, Gertrude was actually sleeping next to him. I don't know. The only weird thing is that I had a messed up dream that night. And then Suzanne also said that she had a messed up dream that night. And then Leva also said that he had a messed up dream that night. And we don't remember it. I don't really remember what the dream was now, but I just remember it was an awkward, almost, it was a nightmare. And they were explaining the same sort of nightmare. I don't know, weird, isn't it? So I was dismissive. I was laughing, like, "Don't be ridiculous." But it's just, it's one of those, isn't it? Max, Leva, all of the rest of these locals all had similar stories of convulsing and chasing things into the jungle. That, this guy wasn't on shrooms. He wasn't drunk. I made sure of that. Weird though. Hey, so yeah, I was dismissive of it, but at the same time, I love that stuff. I'm like, wow, yeah. Maybe the white chicken comes from somewhere. Imagine if you rewind thousands of years ago. I don't know, why a white chicken? Weird, isn't it? And so when you start thinking deep about it, and when you start being open-minded about it, you're like, yeah, who the hell knows? But my logical self just says, no, that's just a story. But part of me would like to believe it.
And I guess in terms of like what's happening next, I believe you got a movie coming out as well.
Yeah, I watched the final version last night, actually. So that means no more changes. This is the version that will go out on TV. It's 2 episodes. I can't say what channels or dates and countries just yet, but we are hoping in the next few months we will be able to announce we're going through the final contractual processes. So that'll be the Mission Yangtze documentary. We'll then potentially work on the second book, which is the sequel to my first, called Mission Possible. And we're already working, we have about 8 to 10 different ideas, and we're currently working on those ideas, both in China and in Los Angeles, with the teams out there, on which makes more sense to go for. So yeah, I feel like it's just the beginning, just getting started. Exciting times for sure.
No, it sounds so exciting. And I know we've had a little bit of a plug there, but we always give our guests an opportunity to plug whatever we wish in terms of sponsors or next adventures, other stuff that's coming up. So before we wind up, the floor is yours, basically.
Just pretty much, I'd say if you're interested to find out more, a lot apart from Mission Yangtze is in the book, Mission Possible. If you're interested to see the documentary, come and join me on Instagram. That's normally where I put out the most stories, and that will be the first announcement of the details of the documentary and what's next. So yeah, but most importantly, stay safe, stay healthy, stay productive. Every red light turns green. We will be out of this soon and back to normal. So just stay positive.
Absolutely. Great message to finish on. And your Instagram's also a great source of inspiration for home workouts as well, I've seen. So it's a great time for that.
Yeah. All of the calisthenics. And that's normally what I do when I'm traveling as well. If I'm in any hotels, if I'm traveling for business or whatnot, I'd just be able to bang out some calisthenics on the floor to stay in shape. How do you guys usually train?
Well, I've bust my knee up, so I've torn my knee on a cycle ride at the moment, and a cracked rib, so I'm kind of fucked on top and bottom at the moment. So Phil's got his home gym.
Oh yeah,
the home gym, yeah. Then normally we just do squats, deadlifts, and just simple core.
Nice.
That's the main exercise for us.
That's cool, man. Got to stay in shape during these times, haven't you? Sets off endorphins, keeps you positive. But hope you also make a fast recovery. That sounds. Did you just come off the bike or what?
Yeah. It was a bit of an embarrassing one. I was just blowing my nose and ended up on a fence.
So.
Oh, no. Jeez.
It's when the problem is when you've retired, you start to get delusions of how good you were.
And
confidence. yeah. Man. Well, I hope you make a fast recovery.
No, thank you very much. So it's been a pleasure, Ash, and obviously check out the documentary, the book, and follow me on Instagram. So thank you very much, mate. Cheers.
Appreciate that.
Thanks.
Good to talk. Take care.